Hey everybody, welcome. It's Wednesday. It's Jack Hammer. I'm back, finally back from vacation. It seemed like it took forever for that to get over with. It was a fun time, but it's good to be back. And tonight I am joined by Jordan Elliot. You might know him on Twitter as Splash Cousin. He was out in Indianapolis, just did a bang up job out there during the combine. How you doing, Jordan?
I'm doing fantastic. It was a long week, but it's nice to kind of get a break and kind of go over my notes and all my thoughts from the past few days.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to follow you your whole that whole week that you're out there. I know you were out there with spent a lot of time with Rob Shue and Jason Aponte, and I think Brad was out there with you guys and a whole bunch of people. But it was fun. The biggest thing for me was the enjoyment of watching you do the interviews with folks and asking questions and getting to chat with some people that wouldn't have even thought of in terms of, I think, Robert Griffin III. I think you were talking to him and some other folks. So some really good information out of that. And thought it'd be perfect to have you come on. And so let's just kind of start there. Let's talk about the combine and kind of get your takeaways from the week in Indianapolis.
Well, first off, this was my first combine, so I was kind of going into this blind. I didn't really know what to expect. And it was just so cool to see, people from every fan base, every team, every possible corner of the NFL was all in this one area in downtown Indianapolis for a few days. There's people who I've watched for, the majority of my life, whether it be NFL Network, ESPN, and whatnot. And I'm not only getting to speak with them, but they're in the same media room as me. I'm getting to work side by side from next to them, pick their brains a bit. So it was a fantastic experience from, a media standpoint for me. And then in terms of, general knowledge for the 49ers and stuff, I was shocked at how much info gets relayed around. And, you'd think with all these people in the same area, it makes sense. But I really got to see firsthand how this really kickstarts the offseason. You start seeing these trades like we've seen in the last couple of days start to kind of fire off in a rapid sense. And you start hearing about these free agent deals. There's a ton of agents in town too. So, it was a fantastic experience all around. And I'm super grateful that I had the chance to go out there and cover it for SB Nation. And just like you mentioned, I got to do it with a few fellas who you guys know covering the 49ers. Made it nice to know that I wasn't alone. I had some friendly friends out there to do it with me too. It was nice.
Yeah, it's always fun to have at least one person to kind of that you're there with, so that you have somebody to go back to if you ask a question and you feel like you flubbed it up. At least you can go back and laugh about it with somebody. I know that was a big help for me this season, working with having Grant in the room and just kind of throw things back and forth before we would go into to a press conference every once in a while saying, "Hey, I'm thinking of asking this. What do you think?" It's fantastic to be able to have someone like that. So that's awesome. In terms of the combine, and who are some of the folks that you got a chance to talk to? I know I saw a few of them on Twitter, but who are some of your favorite? Not to point anybody out or make them feel bad if they don't get named, but who are some of your favorite guys to talk to or ladies?
So by far, I'll be honest, my favorite conversation was actually with Eric Bieniemy, who I know a lot of 49ers fans may not really excite 49ers fans. And I'll be honest, I did talk to him quite a bit about that Super Bowl with the 49ers and Chiefs a couple years ago. But he was just so outgoing, treated me with so much kindness. He's there working at the combine. I actually got to speak with him during the drills at Lucas Oil Stadium. So it wasn't media availability or anything. It was strictly just him taking time out of his day to talk to me. That was really cool. I actually found out that Kyle was a graduate assistant under him at UCLA. They still talk regularly, Kyle being Kyle Shanahan. So that was an interesting thing. I was like, man, what I would give to be a fly on the wall listening to those guys break down some football. I got the chance to speak with Bucky Brooks. That was really cool. I've always admired Bucky's work. He gave me some thoughts about, the 49ers and what he thinks about them going forward, which was really cool. I got to speak with a couple coaches too. I spoke with Leslie Frazier of the Buffalo Bills. He's the defensive coordinator. Had the chance to speak with Robert Griffin III. As you mentioned earlier, it was really cool. He gave his thoughts on Trey Lance as somebody who wasn't in an identical situation, but he also, was a highly touted dual threat quarterback that came out early and was drafted to play in that Shanahan scheme. And I thought his takes on Trey Lance were very refreshing, where he basically said, I haven't seen enough to have a strong opinion either way, and I'm not going to just say something for the sake of drawing clicks or drawing attention. But I do think that he can be special in the offense. The other ones I'd throw out there, it was really nice. I got to meet some really nice beat writers. I got to meet Ryan O'Halloran. He does the Broncos for the Denver Post. I spent some time with Nate Atkins from the Indy Star, which I'm sure we'll get into more. He actually was one of the first people to really, point out to me that this Jimmy to Indy stuff really has legs, and was very confident they were moving on from Wentz. And he said that, early in the week. So that was the kind of the big benefit to me, was getting the chance to talk to these guys one-on-one and getting to hear information like that. And there's a lot of stuff, that was said off the record out of respect to them. I don't want to be like repeating, but that was kind of cool just from a firsthand experience. Having them open up in a certain way and be able to talk. And, I even met Pete Carroll. Again, I know 49ers fans aren't going to be super excited about that, but, he's from the North Bay, Jack. He's a Bay Area guy. So, I just, met him real quick, said my piece, said hello, and kept it moving. But, those are probably my favorite. Eric Bieniemy was probably my favorite. And I also got the chance to talk with Peter Schrager and Ian Rappaport, too. That was really cool. Those guys do great work for NFL Network. So I don't want to talk for 10 minutes about it. I fortunately got to talk with a lot of these people, so I don't want to spend too much of your show. But yeah, Eric Bieniemy would probably be number one just based on the way the conversation went.
No, it's awesome. I love hearing it. You can tell the excitement from those conversations. And I know that the 49er fans don't like Pete Carroll that much, but I think they should remember that Pete Carroll was the defensive coordinator for the 49ers the last time they won the Super Bowl. So you might not like the guy, but he helped you win a Super Bowl, at least the last time that you got there. So definitely a lot of good takeaways. And then, kind of just transition over, there were a lot of prospects. You saw everybody go through, in particular to the 49ers, which prospects really stood out for you?
So I'll be honest, I kind of stuck with the status quo, and I'm like, the 49ers love defensive linemen. They always are going to take a look at defensive linemen, I feel like. And I feel like the way that things are shaping up financially, they're going to have to pay Nick Bosa a lot of money, well-deserved money. Eric Armstead's already eating up a bunch of money. Ebukam, it's kind of up in the air. I felt like they really are in a spot where if they can identify an athletic edge rusher, I think that that's a route they'll go, particularly if they're able to add an additional pick, whether it's a second or third rounder in a trade for Jimmy Garoppolo. So I was really keyed in on that group. I had the chance to speak with Myjai Sanders from Cincinnati. I know a lot of people really like him. The only really red flag was kind of that he weighed in, I think, at like 228 pounds or something like that. But apparently he was dealing with a stomach bug there at the combine. So he did lose some weight that he's not normally going to be playing at. But he's a guy who fits that speed rusher role, that can play that 9 technique, especially out there as a pass rush specialist on passing downs. I got to speak with Boya Mafe from Minnesota. I really liked him as well. And when I asked him if he had met with the 49ers, he kind of perked up a bit and was like, yeah, I like that organization a lot. We had some great conversations. They discussed how they might use me. He's a player where it's more of a projection where you look at the athlete and the intangibles and what you can do versus him, having this insane production in college. Another guy I talked to that I kind of echoed that sentiment was Michael Clemens from Texas A&M, who I really like. Big, strong edge guy. He's 6'5". I think he weighed in at 266, I believe. Really could play that 5 tech, kick out to 9 tech on passing downs. Very versatile. Had the chance to actually speak with his D-line coach from A&M. I believe it was his D-line coach. It was one of his coaches from A&M. My apologies. It's just so much was going on. But I spoke with him about Michael, and he said that he's somebody who always gave 100% on the practice field, was always working hard. He was somebody that never took plays off and always was working, whether it be team activities, stuff they're doing in the offseason. And he had a very serious demeanor to him. And that was actually probably one of my favorite interviews, Jack, because he had this stoic, I forget if I posted it on Twitter or not, but like my first thought talking to this guy was like, he must be a heck of a poker player because his face did not change. His emotion did not change. He's going through these answers in like a very robotic sense. And when I asked if he met with the 49ers, he cracked a little bit of a smile when I asked, did those meetings go well? And he was like, yeah, I believe they did. The first time that I saw him smile all throughout the media availability. So he's another guy where I look at where I'm like, man, if you could get a guy like that with Chris Kosaric and let him work with that defensive line, I think it would be great. Some other guys that I thought would be potential fits for them. I do like Calvin Austin, the wide receiver out of Memphis. I thought he tested very well. I was trying to kind of keep my eyes on some guys who were a bit more speed-oriented that could maybe double as a returner as well as somebody to stretch defenses in the passing game. Tyquan Thornton is another guy who I really liked out of Baylor. He, for 2.5 hours or so, had the record for fastest 40-yard dash ever recorded. And then they were like, okay, well, there's something a little bit off with these testing numbers. So those were some guys I kept an eye on. And some offensive linemen I really liked. I really liked Cam Jurgens out of Nebraska. He's a center who I thought moved really well. He tested off the charts. And, I really did see a disparity in what I saw with my own eyes versus film. Like you could just get a better sense watching them in person. And he's somebody, as well as he looked on TV with all the numbers, just watching him with the eye test, he moved really well. And I think he's somebody, if the 49ers were willing to invest a mid-round pick and have him sit behind Alex Mack for a year or so, as it looks like Mack is coming back, I think it would be a fantastic investment, and he has those athletic tools to get out in space in that zone blocking scheme. Another guy I really liked who I didn't think got that much attention throughout the week was Spencer Burford from University of Texas San Antonio, another guy who I think probably wouldn't be a day one starter, but somebody who has the athletic ability to be great in that zone blocking scheme. And, Mike McGlinchey, no one really knows what's going on with him health-wise. That injury is really tough to come back from. So should they, not opt to do something long-term with him, or if he's not healing the way he needs to and they have a spot starter there for a year, maybe you bring in a guy like Burford where you could have him develop for a year or so and, bank on the traits and your coaching to allow them to maybe step into a role down the line. Those were the guys that really stood out to me. But again, I'll be honest, I spent so much time watching the defensive line guys because to me, in my opinion, I think the 49ers would be more willing to take a chance on a veteran corner and address their secondary through free agency rather than draft a guy and expect them to start from day one. Whereas I think they could take an edge guy early and bank on them kind of, putting them through the motions during training camp with Kosaric and getting some kind of value. I will say the player I was most impressed with while I was there, though, was safety Leon O'Neal out of Texas A&M. He's somebody who I think could fill that role Jaquiski Tartt has had the last couple of seasons, and who has the ability to play down low in the box. He has the ability to rotate and play too high. He has great closing speed, but what really sold me was his charisma. This guy just was he didn't come off as arrogant in the slightest, but he was oozing with confidence. And I think that's such a fine line to toe where, you're confident in what you're able to do, but you're not coming off as like a know-it-all who's, going to turn teams away. So those would be the guys for me. And again, I don't want to just keep going for an hour because I could. There were so many guys that I saw where I'm like, man, they'd look great in the 49ers uniform. But those were the ones that I really came away impressed with.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I know you mentioned Leon O'Neal. One of the other names I was going to ask you about was if you had a chance to really watch Brian Cook, the safety out of Cincinnati.
I did a little bit. I admittedly wasn't paying close attention to him going in. So I wish I could give a more in-depth analysis there. But unfortunately, this is the hardest part, Jack, was I was doing a lot of my networking when we were in the stadium because what happened was there weren't very many media people that chose to stick around. They're like, hey, I'll just go watch at the hotel. I can watch all this testing stuff. I don't need to be there in person. So I was doing most of my networking while these scouts and coaches and stuff were there because they were all in the same general seating as us in the bleachers at Lucas Oil. So I unfortunately did miss a lot of these 40s and a lot of these live workouts just because I was kind of locked into a conversation with someone. So it very well could have been like, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I don't remember, specifically watching him. So I apologize for that. But that's at least why I don't want people to think I'm in there, slacking off. I was just that was when I was doing my rounds and, shaking hands and whatnot.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. You're doing a whole bunch of different things. You got your hands in a bunch of different pots. You're trying to watch the guys out there, but you're trying to have conversations with people and grow your brand and everything. I totally get it. I'm down with you 100% on that. But yeah, definitely the offensive linemen and the safety positions are both positions that I think are going to be interesting. And it was interesting to hear you bring up O'Neal as a guy who might be able to replace Tartt because I know you're big on Jaquiski Tartt.
I am, and I think he's a very good player. I just think that at this point, he came back on a league minimum last year. I think that he and the 49ers just might be at an impasse at this point. And as much as I would like to have him back, I just don't know that it's going to happen. And I think that as much as it would be great to have him there, I can't fault the 49ers for wanting to get younger and cheaper at that position. So Leon O'Neal is somebody to me who gave off the vibe that he was going to come in and bring ability, but bring work ethic too. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's cliche stuff that gets thrown around a lot, but I think the 49ers are a team that really does want those football guys that are going to eat, sleep, and breathe football. And, for what it's worth, when the DBs, the safeties in particular, wrapped up their positional drills at the combine, a few extra guys stayed to work on the field with the coaches. And Leon O'Neal was the last guy off the field. He was off the field about an hour after the majority of the group had left. And to me, and it was at a time, too, this was Sunday night, right? So all these scouts and coaches, they've been there for a few days. They're all packing up, trying to get to the airport, get on those flights home and get out of there. So it wasn't like he was doing it for an optics thing. There were very few people actually left in the stands, and he was out there working. And that, to me, is the kind of thing that I think attracts the 49ers and really brings in this front office. Is when they see guys, obviously you have to have the talent to play, but when you have the desire to be great and what you're doing when the eyes aren't on you really goes a long way for them. And these Texas A&M guys, I don't know what Jimbo Fisher's doing down there, but they really blew me away with what they did. So, kudos to him because whatever they're doing down there really is working.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I'm a big believer in Jaquiski Tartt as well. I really enjoyed watching him play when he's healthy. He's one of the best players on the field. He's shown that throughout his career. It'll be interesting to see how they go about replacing him. And as you said, though, seeing a guy like O'Neal who's staying out on the field when there's nobody around, just to soak up some extra some extra coaching up. That's really impressive for a young guy. So hopefully that'll pay off, and maybe he'll even end up with the 49ers, which would be awesome to see. Real quick before we jump over to the next topic, I'm just going to shout out a couple folks real quick. Maximiliano, hey, how you doing? Good to see you. Jeremy says, hey, Jack, good to see you too, Jeremy. And I got this one's my favorite. I don't know if you're gonna like this one, but Andrew over here, he says that you remind him of Mac Jones. So just in case if anybody ever, I'm a big Mac Jones guy, so I really like you.
Hey, I thought Mac Jones was going to be a good quarterback, and I still think he could be a good quarterback. And I take that as a compliment. I think it's funny. I'm not gonna lie, I was trying to keep it together, but I saw Andrew say that. I thought it was fun. I've never gotten that before. Admittedly, I didn't have time to get my hair up like I normally do today, so maybe it's just it being down. But I thought that was funny, Andrew. So yeah, I was cracking up a bit.
The funny part is I got you on tonight. You're Mac Jones. Tomorrow night I go on with Jesse, and everybody thinks he's Tim Tebow. So I got some great quarterbacks that I get to chat with on here the next couple nights.
Oh man, see, I can't compete there, man. I mean, it's unfortunately Jesse's got the Heisman. He's edging me out there, so I'll tip my cap to him on that one.
I think you guys both won. National championships, if I'm right. So let's just kind of scoot off of the whole combine here for a little bit and get back to the NFL and what's going on with the guys that are there now. And a lot of quarterback movement taking place over the last couple of days. Woke up yesterday morning and saw some big numbers for Aaron Rodgers staying with Green Bay, and I was like, that's great news for the 49ers. And then a few minutes, about an hour later or so, whatever it was, you have Russell Wilson getting traded off of the Seahawks to the Broncos. I think that was the biggest one. And I'm just going to kind of stop there just for a second, because with the movement that we've seen so far, especially the Russell Wilson movement, moving him to Denver, what are your thoughts on that helping the 49ers, or if it does, what your thoughts are?
I think it immediately does, just simply based on the fact that for whatever reason, they historically haven't had great numbers against the Seahawks since the Seahawks came to the division about 20 years ago. But Russell Wilson just always kind of had a way to be a thorn in the 49ers side. And I think the ultimate thing that move did was it signaled that Seattle's ready for a full rebuild. The other thing that really did that for me was the Bobby Wagner move too, because I think it's more so it's on-field stuff you're going to miss, but it's the presence in the locker room, the presence in that city. Those are arguably two of the greatest players they've ever had wear their uniform for that franchise. So to me, it kind of signals that while you can't count them out, I don't think we're going to be in these situations like we've seen the last couple seasons where the 49ers are clearly the superior roster and clearly the superior team, but they just can't seem to get over the hump against Seattle. So I think it'll help simply in that regard that I don't expect. I mean, they obviously could change. They could draft a guy. Things change. But let's say hypothetically they throw Drew Lock out there. I don't see the 49ers losing games, at least two of them, to Drew Lock in the same season. So just based on the fact he's not there anymore, I think it helps them out a lot. And I think it also helps from the fact that I don't think Seattle's really in this position where they're going to be going all in. If I have the number correct, I believe they're eating $40 million in dead cap to have Wilson play for Denver this season. So while that doesn't prevent them from making moves entirely, to me, it doesn't signal that they're a team that's just going to, go out and grab another quarterback and plug and play. So I think they're kind of, you don't want to say punting, because I don't think a Pete Carroll team's ever going to do that. But, well, that's kind of funny. They punt all the time. But you know what I'm saying? Like, they're not going to just give up on the season. I don't think that's really in their DNA. But I do think that this has kind of become clearly the Rams and 49ers division to fight over. And I don't want to count out Arizona. But Seattle, no matter how poor this roster was for the last couple seasons, and I genuinely believe it was, they always found a way to be competitive. They won the division a couple years ago, and I thought they really weren't a great team. And a lot of it had to do with Wilson. So, yeah, I just think based on that alone, it really will help the team.
Yeah, I agree with you. I definitely think that Wilson not being there helps the 49ers because, like you just said, even when that team wasn't very good, it just seemed like Wilson had a way of willing that team to wins. Even this year, as bad as they were, I think if, the reason that they didn't make the playoffs was really because Wilson hurt his finger and was gone for so long. If that hadn't happened, I think they're giving the 49ers a run for their money for that last playoff spot at the end of the season. And they had the tiebreaker and everything. I mean, and even as it was, if you remember, a couple of weeks before they got eliminated, people were starting to stress a little bit around the 49ers if the Seattle was going to be able to sneak back into this thing. So I agree with you there. The one thing that I will say is I'm a little worried though, because now they have the trade capital to go out and maybe go out and get somebody like like DeShaun Watson. I think that's I think would be my worry if I was a 49er fan. Either DeShaun Watson would be an issue, and the other thing could be maybe they're going to go after a quarterback at the top of the draft this year. But as a 49er fan, that's something I wouldn't worry about for next year. I think that'd be something that's going to be more of a problem in 2023.
Yeah, and the Watson thing's really interesting, right? Because if you look at it from just an outside perspective, and I know he has the off the field stuff, but we're talking strictly X's and O's and what's happening on the football field, they would be getting younger and improving at the position, which would, in my eyes, be a net win for any team. So if they were able to pull that off, it is something to be concerned about, because DeShaun Watson, again, I'm not privy to all the off the field stuff and all the developments that have been happening. But if we're speaking strictly about what we see on the field, I think he is a clear upgrade over Russell Wilson, which says a lot, because I think Russell Wilson's destined for a Hall of Fame induction down the road. That would be concerning for me, because I believe he's 26, if I have it correct. I know he's in his mid-20s. He's still a younger guy that could give the 49ers problems for the next decade should they make something like that happen. So I'm with you, Jack. I definitely think that's something to keep an eye on. And they certainly have the capital to move around and do something like that should the off the field stuff get cleared or, be exonerated, whatever it may be.
Yeah, it's interesting because we haven't heard anything from the NFL on this. I don't wonder if it's almost like they're waiting for him to be moved or actually be on the active roster for a team before they make a decision, because we haven't really heard anything on that. It really hasn't been given any kind of clearance in any direction when it comes to DeShaun Watson. So that makes that whole thing a little bit more mysterious as well. And then the other piece too with this whole movement thing was today. You have the Carson Wentz news. That's an interesting one for me. I've been kind of talking up a little bit Jimmy Garoppolo to Indianapolis. It makes sense from a scheme standpoint and a team standpoint with what they have in Indianapolis. And then Carson Wentz gets traded second year in a row. This time he's going up to Washington. And what are your thoughts on that whole move?
So I think you nailed it. So that was one thing. The first day I landed there early, I took a red eye Monday night and got there Tuesday morning. And literally the first day I was there, that was like the worst kept secret, was that Wentz was out of there and that the Colts were off of him. I tried to ask as many people as possible because, sometimes people hear things and, stuff gets said, but it pretty much was a consensus thing that Wentz was not going to be around for this season. And then as the week developed, I had the pleasure of spending some time with a gentleman who covers the Colts and knows the team very well, Nate Atkins. He's the beat writer one of the beat writers for the Colts at the Indy Star, their local paper. And he basically was like, Jim Irsay, this front office, this organization really values the intangible things that Jimmy Garoppolo brings in terms of leadership, guys wanting to rally around him, being somebody that you could sell to the fan base, the charisma he has. And I understand there's a lot of 49ers fans. It's funny. I've talked about this a bit the last couple of days, Jack, and people are like laughing it off. And they're like, oh, he isn't good. And I think that's a whole other discussion because I think a lot of 49ers fans aren't really giving him the credit he deserves. But also, like, that stuff matters. And that was one of the biggest lessons I took away from this week, Jack, is that as much as I like watching film and breaking down game tape and all that stuff, you really don't get the pulse of how valuable a player is unless you know how much an organization values that leadership and tangible stuff. Because I think there are plenty of players in this league who I don't think you could objectively call good leaders, but they're tremendous talent. So that talent kind of supersedes the lack of leadership they may have. But based on everything I heard about Carson Wentz and the lack of that intangible leadership he had, Jimmy Garoppolo to this Colts front office very well could, and from what I'm hearing, does come as a major upgrade to them and make them feel like they're coming away with a net win because they're getting somebody that they feel like they can put on this roster. Just as you mentioned, like, it's not like he's going to a team where he's going to have to throw 40 times a game and carry them to victory. They have a pretty good O-line. It's interesting to see what they do at left tackle, but the O-line's pretty good when healthy. They have a great running back. They have a very good defense that was second in the league in turnovers last year. I don't see why Jimmy can't go and have some of the same success he had in San Francisco, where he's just kind of asked to pilot this offense, continue that efficiency on third down. Like, to me, if they get Jimmy Garoppolo and they're healthy for most of the season and they don't have major injury, they're a 10-win team in the playoffs. And that is a clear upgrade over them missing the playoffs this past season. And that was the kind of takeaway I got from speaking with people who are close to that team and even trying to like gauge the pulse of the fan bases. They're like, hey, we would love to lose in a conference championship. Are you kidding me? We couldn't beat Jacksonville to get in the playoffs. So it's kind of funny to me that the narrative, like, the Indy really wants him, the 49ers fans really want him gone. So it's kind of funny if you see like the different sides of the perspectives. But I agree with you entirely. And kudos to you for pointing that out because the fit really does make sense. And the more and more you dive into it, all of a sudden they move off of Wentz today. Like, I don't think they make that happen unless they're confident they have somebody they can bring in. And I don't see them going the rookie route personally, because their team is pretty, it's a similar situation to the 49ers. They have a lot of veteran guys, and they're a team that feasibly could win now. And I just don't see a guy. And my talent evaluation isn't 100%. I'm not batting 1,000. I don't see a quarterback in this class that's coming onto a team and leading them to a deep playoff run. Last year, I think it was different. I don't see a player like a Mac Jones that's going to come in from day one and lead a team to a playoff berth in this upcoming class.
I agree with you on that last one for sure. I don't think there's a quarterback that's going to be coming in here in 2022 that's going to be able to do what we saw from Mac Jones last year. I just don't think that's there. I think there is a lot to be said when it comes to that quarterback position for being a guy that people want to rally around and just in a way makes your players better. And I know that Jimmy Garoppolo is a guy who benefits from a lot of talent around him. He's a distributor. He's not a playmaker. That's the one thing it's clear because of the his run after catch and those kind of things that help prop him up a little bit. But he does a good job of getting the ball to the guys he needs. I think the one thing with Indianapolis is a couple of things. He's got Michael Pittman, who is his Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk receiver, who can go up and make plays because he's a big guy and he's a really good receiver. You've obviously got the running back with Taylor that you can play behind. But the other thing too is they're really strong in the middle, like you said, of that offensive line. And I think more than anything, for a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo, that's where it's the biggest is if quarterbacks hate having pressure up the middle. They just do. They want to have the pressure come from the edges because that allows them to step up into the pocket and then work their way through. And that's Garoppolo's game. And with the problems the 49ers have had up front the last few years, it comes to bite them at certain times. So I think this is a really good landing spot. And, a lot of my takeaway in believing that was a good spot for him was also, the general manager there, not backing Carson Wentz early. He, right after the season, they asked him about it and he said, well, we'll see, I'm not making any, what he said is I'm not making any guarantees that he's going to be back next year, that kind of thing. And so that's fantastic. And for the 49ers, if this is a spot that they're able to move him to, the Colts have $70 million in salary cap that they can work with. And even after acquiring a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo, are still going to have, I think I read today, like the third or fourth most cap room in the NFL. So this is a perfect destination for Garoppolo. And I think it really makes sense for Indy to get them to a spot where they can win a lot of football games.
Yeah, and I think you just made a great point too. The fact that they probably do need to upgrade at a couple of the skill positions because they do have Pittman, they do have Taylor, but they will feasibly have the means to add a couple more guys that fit that mold where Jimmy can get them the ball in space and allow them to get the ball in their hands and make plays. So this isn't a situation where they're kind of, squeezing in Jimmy and that's all they get. Like they're going to have room to make extra moves. And I think just like you mentioned, like getting a guy like Jimmy, like, again, I don't think any of us are going to make the argument here that Jimmy is this top 5 quarterback who's going to go to a different team and become an MVP candidate. But he's shown if you put the right environment around him, he's somebody that you can win football games with. And I think, unfortunately, there is a sense that I get as somebody who's, grown up around the 49ers fan base and who has the pleasure of covering the team now. It's Super Bowl or bust every season. And, just the reality is a lot of teams don't feel that way. They are happy making the playoffs and winning double-digit games. And especially for that Colts game at the end of the season where they lost in Jacksonville is still resonating in that city. And that's one thing I took away is that they feel like Jimmy Garoppolo is somebody who's going to come in and, it's not an apples to apples thing, but when the 49ers had to go on the road in week 18 against a much tougher opponent to get in the playoffs, Jimmy Garoppolo rose to the occasion in big moments. And the biggest thing to me is that his teammates genuinely come across like they believe in him in those moments. And everything I got from the Colts and people close to the Colts was that it was a complete opposite for Wentz. And that alone can make the biggest difference. I always say it, and it's super cliche, but like human beings play this sport. And I think getting somebody like Jimmy that fits all the schematical things you said, and then also you get somebody that you really think the locker room, can rally behind, that's going to leave the Colts feeling comfortable parting with maybe a second-round pick, maybe, a third and a player, whatever the compensation may be. Like, I think people are looking at this in such a, broad lens of just like, oh, well, Wentz has a big arm and runs around a lot, so you're downgrading when it comes to Jimmy G. When if you really break down their play, like Jimmy is hitting a lot of these throws over the middle that Wentz missed this year. And Jimmy is a guy who is, converting a lot of these 3rd and shorts that Wentz wasn't able to do. And I think people get so caught up in physical ability that they overlook the fact that somebody like Jimmy, like, yeah, he's not a top 5 guy. I'm not predicting him to go win an MVP there, but he can win football games. And for them, that's the utmost priority. And everything else will kind of follow suit after. They'll worry about getting to the Super Bowl after worrying about getting to the playoffs. And they have to do that, get to the playoffs. That part's far more important than, just getting, you can't just sit around. If everybody sat around waiting for a quarterback that's just going to win them Super Bowls, it would be a lot easier. You and I would probably be GMs if it was that easy, right? It's not, unfortunately. So, yeah, that was my takeaway.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on top of that, he has DeForest Buckner there in Indianapolis that can vouch for him with the guys in the locker room and everything. And we heard what was said about Garoppolo from who was it? Eric Armstead over, I think it was yesterday or Monday, talking about how, Jimmy's his guy and the team was so down when he got here. And so there's definitely love for Garoppolo in the locker room. I believe that there's an aura around, you hear people talk about it, but there really is. There's a way that he handles himself from being able to be in press conferences this year and see the way that he kind of manages his way through that. He is very, there's just a presence about him that I think will translate over to wherever he goes that can help him out in Indianapolis if that's where he lands. I know that that's not the only one. That's just the one that everybody's talking about today because of the Wentz thing. And you obviously heard the comments out in Indianapolis. He's definitely not a top 5 quarterback, probably not a top 10 quarterback, but he's a lot better than a lot of 49er fans want to give him credit for. And if he lands in a spot like Indianapolis, I think that'll show. We'll see how that all plays out. Real quick, while we're here, before we get into the compensation piece, in terms of other places, where do you think, if it's not Indianapolis, where do you think he might go?
I think the other 2 places that make the most sense are Pittsburgh and New Orleans. New Orleans is a weird one just because I don't know what they're going to do with their cap space situation. Like, I think they felt fine kicking money down the road when they still had Drew Brees and a really good roster top to bottom. I don't know that they could honestly look at themselves in the mirror and say, hey, we're, Jimmy Garoppolo away from being serious contenders again. Whereas I do think Pittsburgh's kind of in a spot where I definitely think Jimmy would have been an upgrade over what they got from Ben Roethlisberger last season. And you could feasibly put him on a team where they would have to do some work on that offensive line. Their offensive line was not good last year. But you could put him on a team that has a Deontay Johnson. They have a Chase Claypool. Freiermuth looked really good. Najee Harris is a very good running back. Like, they have weapons. And again, he's somebody where he could go there. They have a good defense. They could control the ball, get the ball to these playmakers. And I think he would be good. To me, I still think Indy's the best fit, but to me, it's kind of between Indy and Pittsburgh at this point. But I'm also, again, looking at New Orleans kind of like, if they don't bring back Jameis, what is their alternative? Because I wouldn't feel great about throwing Taysom Hill and Ian Book out there. I don't know if Simeon's still under contract there. He was just awful with all due respect. He's a backup quarterback, So those would be the 3 teams to me that make the most sense.
Yeah, I agree with you. And New Orleans is one that I really, I was on the last week and was talking about New Orleans as being a landing spot. They just don't have a quarterback there that can step in. They just don't. I know they gave a bunch of money to Taysom Hill, but he's not that guy. He showed that last year when Jameis Winston went down. So the one thing that kind of leads me to thinking that New Orleans would be a potential landing spot is they have a defensive coach who I think sees some positives in having a quarterback like Garoppolo lead his offense. Plus, Dennis Allen remembers Garoppolo and the 49ers putting up 48 points on him a couple of years ago. So, it just seems like that would be a good spot to kind of keep an eye on. But you're right, the cap piece is a tough one. And Pittsburgh is one that's kind of been the front runner for everybody from the jump. And I think he fits in really well there in terms of some of their schemes. But I think they might be leaning a little bit more towards the draft. And so I don't know if they're going to want to give up compensation too much for Garoppolo. So I really think the more we talk about it, the more we're leaning towards this being Indianapolis being the landing spot for him. When you look at a Jimmy Garoppolo trade, a potential, what do you think the potential trade compensation for Garoppolo would be?
I think at minimum they'll get a third for him. I don't see how they don't get more than Wentz got, to be honest, because again, like the whole thing with Wentz is that people kept saying like, oh, he had that great year 5 years ago and then he got hurt and he has all this, physical ability. But if you compare the 2 quarterbacks, like Wentz is, and I used to be, I'm guilty of this too. Wentz is somebody where everything is projection. It's always, if you get him in the right spot, he can, flourish in the right system with a coach who believes in him. he just had the coach who probably believes in him more than anybody else in the NFL, and he lasted one season. And the coach just came out and publicly was like, yeah, I stuck my neck out for him and it didn't work. So with Wentz, I just don't feel like it's something where we can confidently sit here anymore and say, hey, well, it's just, it was a bad environment. It was a product of this. Like, at the end of the day, we kind of have to acknowledge he's almost 30 years old. Like, that's kind of who he is as a quarterback. So I don't think it's outrageous at all to expect the 49ers should net more than what the Colts got today, which was 2 third-round picks. I would guess it would be something in the realm of like, maybe a second this year and like a conditional pick. I don't think they both have to be the same year. I think like something like a conditional third would make a lot of sense where it's a 4th round pick. And if Jimmy plays enough, then it turns into a third and you're guaranteeing the second this year. So like hypothetically, if they were to trade with the Colts were to give up 42 this year and then a conditional third next year. If Jimmy meets that playing threshold and he's able to, get that team to the playoffs, they'll probably feel pretty okay about shipping out a pick closer to pick 100 next year. And again, I think the 49ers are in a spot where they have a good amount of draft capital this year. I understand they don't have the 1st round pick, but in the middle rounds where I really think the meat and potatoes of this draft lies, they are in an okay spot where if a team's willing to give them that second next year, or willing to give them a little bit more of a boost for it to come next year, I think that's perfectly okay, especially when you consider the fact that they won't have that first next year either. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I don't think they're so starved for picks that they have to demand it be now. So I'm guessing a second and some kind of conditional pick to go with it, but I do think they will get the 2nd round pick that a lot of people, it seems like, have completely given up on. I think a first is a bit too rich. I don't see that happening, but I think somewhere like pick 42 from the Colts to me is a fair value where I think the Colts go to sleep at night feeling okay about it. And the 49ers can feel really, really good about the value they were able to get from a quarterback with 1 year left on their deal that they opted to move off of.
Okay. And then when you're saying the pick for 2023, so you're thinking that would be a third that could become a second. So there's a potential of this being 2 seconds. Is that kind of where?
I think it would be closer to like a 4th that could turn into a third. So something where it'd be a 4th round pick that conditionally would turn into a third if he's basically able to play, 14, 15 games. Like I think for Wentz, it was 75% of snaps, if I recall correctly, which he did meet, which is why Philadelphia Eagles have their 1st round pick. So Ballard has been open in the past to doing something like that. So I could definitely see that happening again.
Okay. What about the shoulder? Do you think that might have play a little bit into that second, instead of being a second this year, be a third with maybe next year being a little bit higher of the pick because of that surgery that he's in. In fact, they're not going to be able to get him on the field until right before training camp.
So I don't want to sound like a WebMD doctor, but from my, understanding and asking people who know much better than myself, they said it's something where he does need time off, but it's not like an injury where it's like, a newer, more experimental thing where you don't know how somebody's going to respond. Like there's a good amount of data about these kind of surgeries. And generally it's just a rest and recovery thing. It's not an issue where he's going to need to, you're going to be worried that he's not throwing the ball the same 4 months from now as he is now. So that to me, I wouldn't expect it to change it just based on the fact that if that's the truth, it shouldn't alter it because again, like what is a veteran really going to gain from OTAs and minicamp? Like you can sit that out and it's not really going to hurt you. If it was a rookie, then I'd be like, okay, maybe a team's, their draft stock's going to drop a little bit. I think that's far more important for players entering the league rather than a player entering year 9. So I wouldn't expect it to have too much of a change, but I do think the timing of it all is a bit curious. I don't want to, throw out conspiracies or anything like that, but I definitely thought it was a little strange that the 49ers were pretty much like, yeah, this kind of blindsided us. We didn't, expect this. And it didn't seem like something they were in lockstep in. And when you're talking about, fairly major surgery for a franchise signal caller that you've been pretty open, is going to be on the trade market, I definitely think that's something where it would have been much better from an optics standpoint for them to be kind of tied at the hip at, coming out and, being in lockstep discussing it rather than, oh, well, yeah, we were just as surprised as all you guys hearing about the surgery.
Yeah, that's my takeaway. That last piece, what you said was, the surprise, and it was when Lynch talked last week at the combine. The one thing that jumped out to me is at the end of his long, the second question he was asked was about Garoppolo, and at the end of his long answer, he says, "I haven't even talked to Jimmy yet. I know as much as you." And I'm thinking, holy moly, you just talked for 5 minutes, and you haven't even talked to Jimmy Garoppolo at that point. And if that's true, then that gives you a kind of an idea of where this thing's going. And I'm okay with saying that I think there's some definite play going on here with Garoppolo's folks in the 49ers, or it sure feels that way, because this thing could have been, I understand the explanation, but for the 49ers to not even know about it until right before it's going to happen, I think there was some some funny business there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like at the end of the day, like I don't like feeding into conspiracies and he did it to spite the 49ers because none of us know that. But I also think that just like you mentioned, like he's had a month off of football. They haven't been playing football for a month, and it seems very odd. Like that's a pretty significant amount of time that would have been a part of the recovery period, and it would have been something where there would have been a little bit more transparency. But at the same time, too, I will say this, and I think you'd agree because I think you and I are pretty, in unison when it comes to the takes on Jimmy Garoppolo recently. Like a lot of teams would take Jimmy Garoppolo with a mending shoulder over the alternatives on the market and the quarterbacks coming out in this class. So I don't think it completely torpedoes his value, but I do think that it does just raise kind of questions where it's like something to kind of monitor, it's something to be like, okay, well, let's see if anything else that's strange happens in terms of the timing and the, statements, maybe like, is there something cryptic that gets said or something released through an agent? But as of now, like, I just don't think it's something where, like, I've seen people go as far as to say that he's doing it so that the team cuts him and can't trade him. I don't think it's going to get that bad. I think the 49ers will actually, guide him to a place that he wants to go and work with him there. I don't think that's just an optics PR thing. And from what Adam Schefter was saying, I believe it sounded like they pretty much were out on Washington, and that just wasn't an option because Jimmy didn't want to go there. So I do think the 49ers, he does have the no trade clause until the 16th, but I do think there is some level of like, hey, we understand what the situation is. We know this isn't, ideal, but we want to work together and make this be as amicable as possible. So while I do think it's questionable, the timing, I don't think there's some like petty back and forth, like backstabbing kind of thing going on, which I don't know if you've seen. Like that's kind of the narrative I've seen. And I'm like, I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I know you have to run real quick and grab your charger, so I'll let you do that. I'll take a couple of questions. We'll get back to it real quick. I'm gonna go ahead and just remove him just for a second. We'll come back to when he shows up back. Really quick, one of the comment over in the side, Bolivar asks, who lands DeShaun Watson? We talked about that one briefly if you missed it. But the answer for me, I think there's a real chance that DeShaun Watson ends up in Seattle. It just seems like they have the draft capital now to do that. So I have a good feeling that that's one of the locations, the potential landing spots for Watson would be Seattle. As long as everything plays out for him and he's able to be okay there. The other thing that I've heard a lot of, and you might have as well, is that the Steelers are not interested in DeShaun Watson, which makes sense. That kind of goes along with their whole MO as an organization to not bring on, for somebody to be in that situation for them to want to bring him in when he's already in there. I know they dealt with that a little bit with Ben Roethlisberger, but I just don't see them bringing in DeShaun Watson. And Jordan is back, so I'll bring him back on. There you go. So now we're charged up. We're ready to go. We don't have to worry about the computer dying or anything like that. Perfect. One last thing, because you're a little bit more optimistic on the trade compensation than I am. I was thinking even if the 49ers are able to get a third this year and then even a third next year, that would be a conditional. I'm possibly moving up to either a 2 or a 1 depending on the play. I'd be happy with that for the 49ers, considering what they spent to get him, considering the injury and so on. I do think I really do feel like they're trying to push for a 1. And if they can get that on the conditional side, that they're going to try it. And that might be what's slowing this down. The one thing I want to ask you real quick is, when do you think this is going to be done? Do you think this is going to get done by next Wednesday, which is the start of the new league year?
I definitely do. I think it kind of has to be, right? Like, this is my whole thinking, is that if you are a team like the Steelers or the Colts, and especially like we're just talking about the Colts, how they do have some players, but they have a lot of money to add some extra playmakers and some dynamic players. How much better are these free agency meetings going to go when you're able to pitch your team and say, hey, here, I have a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo who just had Deebo Samuel have a career year. George Kittle loves playing with. George Kittle's having these, insane record stretches for a tight end with Jimmy Garoppolo throwing him the ball. You can pitch that. Well, where again, he's not Tom Brady, but he's somebody that you can sell to a free agent, and somebody knows that this guy is going to allow me to get the ball, and I'm going to be a focal part of this offense, rather than saying, hey, we have Sam Ehlinger on the roster. With all due respect to Sam Ehlinger, like, that to me wouldn't be very alluring if I'm a free agent. And the same thing goes for the Steelers. Mason Rudolph and Dwayne Haskins aren't objectively better players than Jimmy Garoppolo. So I think the 49ers clearly want to move on. They want to get this done as soon as possible. It's going to clear up space for them in free agency. It's going to allow them to evaluate where they need to go in terms of extensions, restructures, and all that. And it just makes all the sense in the world for these teams to come in and be able to, slap Jimmy Garoppolo on as the face of their franchise and have him be that guy that they can sell to not only free agents, but the fan base. So I think it will get done. And I think it also, again, I would have to double check. I apologize if I'm off with this, but I'm almost positive once the new league year kicks in, that's when Jimmy's kind of like no trade clause expires and he doesn't have a say in where he goes. So as much as I don't think the 49ers would just wait it out and then send him to somewhere he doesn't want to be, I do think it just, like, from everybody's vantage point, it makes way more sense to get it done soon. And I think the way we've seen these dominoes fall the last couple of days, I expect it to get done before the end of this weekend, honestly.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and you're right. And in terms of getting it done, it can get done at any point. It doesn't matter. I know he has a no trade clause, but the no trade clause expires at the start of the new league year, which is when any potential trade is actually going to be finalized. I mean, they'll have everything written up and done for all intents and purposes, but it can't actually be processed by the league until June 6th, until the 16th of March, regardless. So but I'm with you on that. I think it's going to happen by the start of the new league year. You're right. I've heard that about, with both teams. Allinger, you don't want to go in there. Same thing with Pittsburgh, with Mason Rudolph, and really I think you could say the same thing about the New Orleans Saints. If you don't, who is the quarter? Who are you going to pitch to a potential free agent or to anybody if you're New Orleans? Because I don't think there's a whole lot of people that want to go play with the quarterbacks that they have on their roster. Who wants to go play with Ian Book or who was it? I remember Taysom Hill. Who wants to go play for those guys really? And so March 16th, that's the date to pay attention to with all these. Really, I think it might even be March 14th, because that's when all these negotiations can start.
I would add too, real quick, because you had like a light bulb go off in my brain. Trent Williams came out openly and said, hey, I came to the 49ers and I chose to ink an extension here. Like, Kansas City was beating down his door. They wanted to sign him and bring him onto the Chiefs, which, have been in the AFC Championship game for 4 years in a row. He said that Jimmy Garoppolo and his belief in him played a huge role. Hey, I'm sure 30, some odd million a year, whatever his extension ended up being. I'm sorry, again, it's been a long week. He got paid a lot of money. I get it, but he could have got paid a lot of money by anybody. And he went out of his way to say that his belief in Jimmy Garoppolo and him leading the 49ers to the Super Bowl and being the quarterback on a Super Bowl team is what brought him in. So again, I understand there's a lot of 49ers fans who think the dude just stinks and they're just over it. And hey, like, I get it. I haven't admittedly been his biggest fan, but I also realized that I wasn't willing to give him the credit he deserves for far too long. And I think when you factor in statements from players like Trent Williams, where again, he could have gotten paid by anybody, but there's something about that guy wearing number 10 that made him want to come along. That goes a long way in these free agency meetings and pitching yourself to other potential free agents and playmakers that you're going to want to bring in. So I agree with you entirely. When you look at it, like, is Trent Williams sacrificing going to Kansas City to play for Ian Book or Sam Ellinger? I would believe probably not,
Yeah, I'm with you there. I don't think so. Let's move off of the quarterbacks a little bit. I know everybody loves talking about quarterbacks. It's always fun. The quarterbacks get blown up regardless of who they are in so many different ways. But the 49ers, I think there might be some interest there. I think you mentioned this earlier in terms of the directions that they may want to go with building the roster, that they might not want to go with the young route, that they might want to bring in somebody that's an established player through free agency and then use their draft picks on these other positions. Should the 49ers go out and sign J.C. Jackson, he's going to be a free agent away from the New England Patriots.
With all due respect to JC, who's been a fine player, and I thought he had a great season, I would be a little bit hesitant, and here's why. I think that when you're playing in a system that's as structurally sound as Bill Belichick, and you're playing in that scheme where it's really it's built around the corners, playing the amount of man coverage that they do, and everything's kind of set up for them to be put in a place to thrive playing that press man scheme that they really deploy a lot in New England. As much as I think DeMeco Ryans has evolved and ran a lot more of that kind of stuff than Robert Saleh did, the 49ers are still going to be a zone-heavy team. So I'm looking at it as I don't think that they're going to be able to maximize the best of JC's ability, if that makes sense. Well, also, he's going to cost them a significant amount of money. In my opinion, he's the top corner on the market. I think he's going to get paid like the top corner on the market. And I just think that you could find a guy, like the guy I'm really watching is Casey Hayward, who spent the last season with the Raiders. He was in Gus Bradley's scheme. So it's something that, again, it's not apples to apples. It's a little different, but they're going to run a lot of the same coverage concepts that the 49ers will run under DeMeco Ryans, and he's somebody that I think would be substantially cheaper. So I'm out on it simply based on the fact that I think he priced himself out of where I would be comfortable paying regardless. And I just don't think that he's the kind of player. I think it'd be the classic example, Jack, where you see a player or a coach leave that Patriot system and still be a serviceable player, but they're getting paid to be the player they were in New England, and you just don't see the same result. And I just can't shake that feeling. And it could just be my gut leading me the wrong way, but I just wouldn't be willing. I think he could command upwards of, 12, 13 million a year, maybe even more than that. And I just wouldn't feel comfortable paying that if I'm the 49ers. I think, unfortunately, they were a bit jaded based on the fact that we saw so much of Drake Kirkpatrick and Josh Norman and some of these guys. But I do think if you sign a veteran and you're able to retain maybe a K'Wan Williams, Emmanuel Mosley's able to stay healthy, that defense and that pass rush is so good that I don't think you need to sink that kind of investment into a top flight corner.
Yeah, I hear you. What about DJ Reed? If I know we're talking about JC Jackson, but what about DJ Reed? That's just, I understand that everybody, that's the name that pops up because he's the former 49er, but he also fits so many different things. He can play outside corner, which is on the side opposite of Emmanuel Mosley, and which is where he played best, and he can play inside at corner. I mean, he kind of kills two birds with one stone for the 49ers if they were able to pick him up.
I think that's a fantastic idea, Jack. And it's funny because I've mentioned the same thing where I'm like, man, if they could get him to come in and play nickel corner, I think he'd be great as a nickel corner. I know he wants to play outside, and he's shown that he can. The pushback that I always get, and I don't know if you get the same thing, is, the 49ers cut him. He wants no part of the 49ers. And my response is kind of like, hey, when you start backing up the Brinks truck and you start dumping a lot of zeros into a guy's bank account, that, you can kind of, that water goes under the bridge a little bit. So I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility. And again, he's somebody, there's familiarity there. And I don't know all the details, obviously. Maybe there is some bad blood. But to me, what it seemed like it was a player who was injured, that the 49ers thought that they could pass through waivers and then have on their IR and not, lose. I don't think they cut DJ Reed with the understanding that they didn't want him or they didn't think he was a good player. I just think it was an instance where Seattle was like, hey, we see a player with potential. The 49ers can't fit this guy on the 53-man roster while he's hurt. We're going to jump on it. So I would wonder what the feeling is mutually there. But yeah, I think from a scheme fit, that's a fantastic point, Jack. He would be a great player. And again, he's somebody that's familiar with the building. It's not somebody that's going to come in and you're going to have the filling out process and wonder if they're going to fit in okay. There's still a lot of players left from the last time DJ Reed was on this team. And again, you could bounce him around. If you have a situation where your nickel corner gets hurt, or your a player on the outside gets hurt and you have to move him to where Mosley's side was, like, you could feasibly do that and have that guy fill in and play all, really three positions at the corner spot in my eyes. And I think the biggest thing with him is that people get on him for his size. I don't care what you measure at. I care what you play at. And he's somebody who plays above his size, in my opinion.
Yeah, he does. And on the going back to JC Jackson, because I never gave my opinion on if they should. I mean, if they can figure out a way, the Flyers don't have a lot of cap room. They're only going to maybe be able to splurge with one guy. You're saying that Jackson might be able to get 15, 16 million. I think just based on the numbers, for the receivers, you got a guy like Michael. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name. The guy from Los Angeles. He goes out and he's getting $20 million a year. So I mean, I think he might even be a little low on a number for JC Jackson. I think that it's going to be really expensive. And how many of these top flight, I understand we want to get the number one corner on the market. I totally get it as a 49er fan. That's what you want to do. But how many of these top guys can you pay? Are you going to be able to pay Deebo Samuel, JC Jackson, Nick Bosa, Fred Warner? You got George Kittle. Are you going to trade George Kittle? What are you going to do there? Just because of the numbers going up on Kittle's contract. That's the only reason why I mentioned that. So, I would like to see JC Jackson. From a dollar and cent standpoint, I don't know if you can really make that work and justify it with everything else that you have going on with your roster without moving on from somebody that is a fan favorite.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I probably am a little bit low, to be honest, because I don't know if other teams are maybe going to feel the same way I do, and they know better than I. And I think you're right. He probably is closer to 20 than he is to 15 when it's all said and done. And I think just like a great example, like if you look at Jalen Ramsey in the Super Bowl, like Jalen Ramsey's a great cornerback. He's still getting beat. Like the way that the NFL is evolving, the way these guys are going, I think people just get it in their minds that if you get a lockdown corner, you're getting, prime Darrelle Revis or a prime Deion Sanders. Those guys are generational. They're really, really hard to come around. And I think, Jalen Ramsey, people would argue he's the best corner in football now. People might think, Tre'Davious White or Joe Alexander, whatever. All of these guys are going to get beat at some point. And that's the biggest thing, is that I understand 49ers fans have kind of this like PTSD in a sense of watching, the secondary get beat towards the end of games and stuff. But that really didn't happen in my eyes down the stretch of the season. Like, I thought, to be honest with you, it's unfortunate because they propelled so much of that deep playoff run. Like, the defensive line kind of is what slowed them down in that championship game in my eyes. I thought the defensive line wasn't getting the same rate of pressure. I didn't think it was objectively an issue where it's like, man, they're getting home every time and the secondary just can't cover. Like, I think they can get by with just adequate cornerback play. So I'm with you there. I just think that this notion that if you just pay the top corner on the market, it's going to solve all your issues. I think that really not only doesn't do that, but it also sets you up for failure 2 or 3 years from now when you're going to have to re-up some of these deals and you're going to have to re-up your Fred Warners and these guys that are under reasonable contracts now, but they're going to be due to get paid again soon. And when that cap number increases, so will the contracts. And that's where I think people lose sight of, like, oh, the cap's going up, it'll be fine. Well, guess what? That means these players are going to get paid more too. They're not just going to keep taking the same amount of money. So I agree with you there. I just think it just doesn't make sense from a financial standpoint. And I don't see a player that's so scheme-proof that they can just come in and on any of the 32 teams and make the impact that would be worth the dollar amount they're probably going to get.
Yeah, and I agree with you on a lot of what you're saying. And the 49ers thought process has always been that you build from the pass rush is going to help everybody else. That's what we've heard over and over with this group. So having them go out and spend big money on a cornerback, that just doesn't really jive with what this organization, the way that they build their roster. And I really believe what you're saying. And I believe it's worked out for the 49ers. They have a strong pass rush, and you've got to, every once in a while, you're going to end up in a game where you have a quarterback on the other side who makes some really good plays. And even with all that, if the 49ers quarterback had just hit the open receivers, we're not even talking about the fact that, the numbers that were put up by the Rams in that game. And it wasn't just Kupp. It was both their wide receivers had big games. And so I really think that's I feel like they're on the right track there. And if it's JC Jackson, that's great. If not, I don't think it's going to be a make or break. NFL is all about the quarterback. So when it comes down to when we get down to the end of the season, it's going to be about what Trey Lance does or does not do for the 49ers.
And I think, you make a great point with that too. That's really what it comes down to. And it's so different if you're a team that didn't really build the defensive line the way the 49ers had, where you are reliant on coverage over pressure. I just think that, like, it's not some unforgivable offense if the 49ers don't go out and shell out a bunch of money on a cornerback. Like, I do think they should do their due diligence. I think they'll, sniff around on Stephon Gilmore. I think they'll check in on maybe a guy like Casey Hayward. I think they'll definitely do their due diligence with Jason Verrett. Maybe they bring him back on some kind of incentive-laden deal. But I'm with you there. Like, this isn't something where, people should be lining up with, pitchforks and getting angry that the 49ers didn't sign a top flight corner. It's just not something that's going to make or break them. Because just like you mentioned, if Trey Lance goes out and is the quarterback, that many believe he could be, and he could just simply operate this offense, that's ultimately what's going to define the season. It's not going to be that they didn't spend $5 extra million on a free agent corner.
Yeah. And real quick, that was it. I mean, I don't have anything else to say. I'm right there with you. I do want to throw this one up real quick. James is a big fan of yours, it looks like. Says, Splash Cousin, let's go. Thank you for the donation, James. That's awesome. No, but I agree. I think this is a team that has a lot of potential. I'm really looking forward to seeing what's going to happen here, because we're really going to be getting into free agency next week, and starting Monday, I believe it is, right? Is the beginning of the tampering period. So next week's going to be a lot of fun for us as far as what we get to write, because we're going to have some good stuff to talk about. And you got a big fan over in my comment section. Michael Miller is one of your biggest fans. I wouldn't worry about him. Michael's a great guy. That sounds like me when I would have my call-in shows. I was about the level of our conversations going back and forth. He's a good guy. And I just think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch how this team's built. And, I just want to say thanks to you for making the time to come on here and spend an hour with me. It's the first time we've been able to chat together, and I've had a lot of fun.
I appreciate it. It's been an absolute pleasure, Jack. I'm happy to come on anytime. I appreciate everybody watching, and listening. I'm sorry. There's been a couple times where I'm kind of it's been a long week. I was in Indianapolis. My body clock was all messed up. I'm from the West Coast going out there. So I was working these 18, 20-hour days, barely sleeping. I don't want to make excuses, but, I apologize if I was rambling a bit there, kind of, trying to figure it out along the way. But I really appreciate you guys having me on. And, it's always a pleasure talking with you, Jack. I'm a big fan of your work, and I respect the way that you cover this team. And it's always a pleasure chatting, whether it be here, Twitter, wherever it may be. I'm always happy to do it.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to do this again soon. And then you're over at Niner Nation, so get over there and pick. If you're not already following Jordan on Twitter, make sure you do so. Check out all of his articles over. It's Niner Nation. Are you also with SB Nation as well, or is it just Niner Nation?
I am. Yeah, so as Niners Nation is just a part of SB Nation, but I do some
Okay.
stuff for them as well. I'm going to kind of start tailoring a bit more of my coverage for not just the 49ers, doing some other stuff for them as well. If you guys aren't familiar, SB Nation does great stuff where they cover pretty much any NFL, NBA, MLB team. They have a good blog covering pretty much each of those individually. And I do know the team at Niners Nation is great. They're fantastic to work with. So you can catch any of the content there. And if you're looking for, national NFL news, like stuff like the Wentz trade, there'll be good stuff put out by the national writers for them as well.
Awesome. And so you got some good friends. There's Chardal's a fan of yours. Chardal's the GOAT when it comes to the commenters. And then Andrew also says, thanks, Jordan, you did great. I think so too. That was a lot of fun. We're definitely going to do this again. Maybe once free agency starts kicking off, I'll reach out. We'll be able to jump on and do this. And maybe there'll be some breaking news we can share with each other too. So it'll be fun.
Anytime, Jack. Like I said, it's an absolute pleasure. I'll definitely make the time. I'll move the things around that I need to come on. It's a pleasure talking with you.
Perfect. Awesome. That's the show for the night, everybody. Thank you for joining in. If you can make sure to like this, subscribe if you're already subscribed to the channel, and hit that little bell notification as well so you know when we go live so you never miss any of the shows. That'd be much appreciated. Like I've talked about, trying to get the viewership up on this and trying to get to 7,000 is kind of the number that I put out there, which is quite a jump for our the numbers on this channel, but that's the goal. So if you can share it with all your friends and family and everybody else, let's do it. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks again for showing up. And I'll be back tomorrow night, 5:30 with Jesse for the next episode of the Hammer and Nail Show. Take care, everybody. Thanks again.